and welcome to our March Penn TESOL East second Saturday seminar. This morning we have with us Monica Baker, and she's going to present about enhancing English proficiency through spaced repetition, practical classroom strategies. Our second Saturday seminars are every month, the second Saturday of the month, and the next one is going to be on April 12th. And we have a presenter ready for April 12th. And in May, on May 3rd, we have our Penn TESOL Spring Conference. And our spring conference is going to be in person at Temple University at the Howard Gittes Student Center. And currently, we are accepting proposals for the conference. For more information on the Penn TESOL Spring Conference, please check our Penn TESOL website. We will be very happy to have you join us at the conference. We always have a good number of presentations that are relevant to our field to advance our professional development in the field. On June 14th, the second Saturday in June, we have another second Saturday seminar on Zoom. So we look forward to having you join us at our events. Moreover, please make sure you check our PTE Voices publications. They are available at our website. And currently, we need submissions for the next PTE Voices. Also, check our YouTube channel. This presentation is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube, Penn TESOL YouTube channel. So please make sure you check it out. And also check out the previous presentations that we had every month. In addition to the various webinars and IELP practice sessions. Today's session with Monica, she's going to talk about, she said, this in session investigates the effective utilization of spaced repetition to elevate English language proficiency. This session will showcase actionable classroom techniques, illustrating how spaced repetition fosters long-term vocabulary retention, deepens grammar understanding, and cultivates fluent communication skills. Facilitated accelerated language acquisition. So I forgot, I am Helen Fitzgerald, a board member of Penn TESOL East. I work with the Title II agency with adult students as the in-house professional development specialist, digital literacy specialist, and DSL instructor. But without further ado, I would like to invite Monica to start with her presentation. We are very much looking forward to learning more about enhancing English proficiency in the classroom. Please, if for any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. And towards the end of the presentation, we will discuss your questions and comments in the chat. Thank you very much. And Monica and Bill, if there's anything else you would like to add.
And Monica is the president of New York TESOL, correct?
So I'm the past president. I was the president. Now I'm past president. So, but we're all still very actively, when you have that role of president and then you move on, you're still very much connected to the organization and everything we do. So yes, I was the past president of New York State TESOL. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Can I get started? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm so glad to be here. So even though I am in New York, I'm a New York teacher, my partner actually lives in Philadelphia. So I spend my weekends, right now I'm usually in Philadelphia, but we have a science fair going on today. So I'm at work, I'm running back and forth, getting my students' projects set up, and I'm here. But usually on the weekends and holidays, I'm in Philadelphia. So the reason I said, I would love to present for Penn TESOL is I want to get more involved in your organization and your community, because that's where I am for a lot of my time. And I'm excited about the spring conference. Now I'm going to submit a proposal to that too. So I'm really excited to meet all of you and become part of your community. So, oh my God, when I was listening to Helen read that abstract for this proposal, I was like, that sounds so stuffy. Did I write that? Because really, I'm a very casual presenter, and spaced repetition, although it sounds very academic, is the most basic strategy we can be using with students of all ages. Now, I teach K through third grade right now, but I've taught college level kids, I've taught high school level kids, and this applies to everyone, adult learners to kindergartners and everyone in between. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to share my screen. Let's make sure I can share. Can you see my screen yet?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Perfect. I'm going to do slideshow. Okay, here we go. So yeah, look at this stuffy title, Enhancing English Proficiency Through Spaced Repetition. So we're going to see though what I mean, that this is very simple. This is a little bit about me. Oh, there's a lovely picture that one of my students drew of me. Look, I'm holding a slice of pizza. That's what she thinks of me. Okay. So I have been an English language teacher in the Hudson Valley area of New York for 20 years. This is my 20th year doing this job, which I am very passionate about. I'm past president of New York State TESOL. I also serve, I'm the chair of the Membership Professional Council of TESOL International. So if any of you watching are coming to Long Beach in 2 weeks, I'll see you there. I'm also a union leader. I'm the chair of the Teacher Center, and I'm an instructor with NYSET, the New York State Teachers Union, their Education and Learning Trust. So I wear a lot of hats, but really my heart is in the classroom with our youngest English language learners. And I'm going to start by telling a little story. This is Miguel. He's in kindergarten and he is one of my students. He is actually a Quechua speaker. A lot of my students are from Guatemala and actually speak Quechua as their first language, and usually some Spanish as their second language, and then they're learning English in school. So this is Miguel, and Miguel could not remember the color red if his life depended on it, right? So we're doing color words, of course, as we do with, kids who are starting to learn English, especially our little kids, but everyone needs to know the color words, right? That's something that all English language learners are probably going to be learning. And so Miguel could not remember that word for red. And I was practicing it with him and practicing, and we go outside one day. We were doing a color scavenger hunt, and I finally thought, he's got red. He knows it. We go outside. He screams red, and he runs over and touches the grass. And I'm like, oh no. I'm like, no, Miguel, that's green. So I was like, okay, clearly, I'm not clicking with this kid when it comes to the color word red. So I need to stop and think about how I can give Miguel some additional practice hearing that word, but not just hearing it, using that word, so that he really gains confidence and then can access that word whenever he needs it correctly, label things, talk about it, and now that word will stick and be part of his vocabulary. So this was the plan. Right outside my classroom is a red fire extinguisher. And I said, I'm using this every single time I pass that fire extinguisher. In the beginning, I'm going to talk about it. Look at this red fire extinguisher. Oh, it's so red. Look, oh, there's the red fire extinguisher. I kept passing it. I kept talking about it. The other kids probably thought I was crazy, right? But I kept making a big deal about it's so red there. It's red, it's red, it's red for the first few days. And then I started to say, oh, there's that red fire extinguisher. Miguel, what color is it? I had just told him, and then he repeated red. And then after a few days of that, I would say to Miguel, what color is it? Without first giving him the word. And he started to say it. And then once we kept doing that every day, then I said, you know what? I'm going to give it a little bit of space now. We're going to wait 2 days. Then I'm going to ask him again, does he still have it? Yes, he does. Okay, now I'm going to wait a little longer. Ask him again. Make sure he still has it. And what I've explained to you right now is the whole premise in a very easy to understand way of what spaced repetition is. It's taking whatever you're working on with your students, like I said, whether they're Miguel's age or an adult learner, figuring out what is critical, what they really need to be learning, immersing them in that language, and then slowly pulling back for longer and longer intervals of time, and then reassessing to make sure they still have whatever it is you wanted them to learn. And that is the premise of spaced repetition. Now, the reason this is very important to language learners is because, look at this. According to language research, we may need as many as blank repetitions to learn a new word. What do we think it is? Any idea? You could put
70.
Chat. Okay, look, here are some choices. So, do we think we need 10 more? 20? Some research says as many as 40 repetitions. There's differences in the research. I think 10 is extremely, extremely low. And we know as English language teachers, we know that some of our kids do require maybe as many as 70, right? This is what the research shows, but we know our students, and some do need more. Now, we also have to be careful with that word repetitions, because what does that really even mean? Just hearing it? Well, if we hear a word, I mean, I could tell you a word in catchy 40 times, and that doesn't mean you're going to have any clue what I'm talking about, right? So we don't want our kids to just hear it and repeat it. We want them to actually be using it, right? Because that's when we know we hit the jackpot, right? It's not just about saying it or hearing it. It's about being able to actually use whatever concept, whatever word that it is that we want them to connect with. Okay, so I'm going to show a very quick video that breaks down spaced repetition. Again, gives you some visuals to connect with when I'm talking about those those intervals. So we're going to take a second and watch this quick video. Let me just make sure you can hear it okay. Commercial first. Wait for this commercial. Okay, here we go. Can you hear the video okay? Just make sure. We're okay hearing the video?
We heard the ad a little bit.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I just stopped it to make sure we're hearing it okay. Let's get back.
We're not hearing it.
Oh, okay, hold on 1 second. Technical glitch. Give me a second. I'm going to stop sharing and do that again. Sorry, everyone. Let me make sure I'm sharing audio. Here we go.
Maybe we didn't hear the ad and my brain filled that in.
Like most students, you've probably crammed the night before an exam.
We hear it now.
Yeah.
And after you probably did okay, or maybe you even did well. But did you remember any of what you learned after the exam? One evidence-based way to better remember what you've learned is through spaced repetition, or spacing out your learning in practice of new knowledge or skills. Although this might seem novel, this is hardly a new concept. It was first described in 1885 by a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. Here's how it works. Say you plot your attention, or how much you remember of something, versus time. Now you learn that something on day 0. Without reviewing it, the forgetting curve will look like an exponentially decaying curve, which is kind of scary. If you review, or better yet, actively retrieve the material at increasingly spaced intervals after learning it, then the forgetting curve starts to flatten out, and you'll get a lot better long-term retention. Now, the goal here is to review the material at the right time. It turns out that the best time to revisit information that you're trying to learn is right around the time that you would naturally forget it. Since forgetting typically follows this exponential curve, the trick becomes timing your study sessions around it. Practically, this means having more widely spaced intervals between study times for the material that you're more familiar with, and shorter intervals between study sessions for material that you're less familiar with. While this strategy would be effective for all fields of study, It's especially important for students in the medical field, who have to retain key knowledge and skills in order to care for their patients. Kind of frighteningly, one study found that without spaced repetition, after 1 year, medical students forgot up to 33% of their basic science knowledge. And after 2 years, more than 50%. But when students and residents apply spaced repetition strategies in their studying, they significantly outperform their counterparts, with some studies showing close to 40% greater learning efficiency. Knowing about spaced repetition is one thing, but what about applying it? Students, especially those in the health and medical fields, have to remember hundreds or even thousands of bits of knowledge and skills. Because of this, it'd be incredibly hard for them to keep track of when they should revisit each piece of information, especially since each bit of information will follow its own learning curve. And this is why researchers and software developers are using computer algorithms to try and help students optimize their studying. These algorithms help you learn by sorting information based on your responses to questions. So if you get a question wrong, they'll automatically prioritize that information for repetition over the information in questions you answer correctly.
Okay, so that I'm going to stop the video there. That is basically what I was talking about when I was talking about Miguel. So Miguel needed, in the beginning, he needed to really hear and understand that word red, right, in connection with that fire extinguisher, and having it be something naturally that we passed again and again throughout the day. It helped me as his teacher also to remember, oh yeah, Miguel's working on that, right? It was a visual cue for not only Miguel, but for me, that so I didn't even have to really think about it. Every time we passed it, I was like, oh yeah, Miguel, here it is, it's red. But then I'm not going to every single day for all of kindergarten talk about the fire extinguisher. I needed to gradually release him, but then remember to come back to it. Because if we said red, 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 red all week long, and then the next week we moved on to something else without revisiting that, chances are he would have lost it. And then we would have been back where, okay, now we need to get him immersed in the color red again. And I choose this example because it's so simple. But now all of you can think about a student you work with, whether it's a high school student, an adult learner, anyone, and think about something that maybe they are struggling with. It could be a vocabulary word, but it also could be an actual thing that you want them to do. So another example that is not related to English language learners is, once I changed a tire, like 20 years ago, right? I was with someone and we changed, and he showed me how to change a tire, and I was kind of doing it, but he was walking me through it. And I was like, oh, wow, I know how to change a tire. But guess what? 20 years have passed. If I get a flat tire today, I'm out of luck. There's no way I even know where to start. That learning completely went away over the years, and I have no confidence in that skill. But if when I had that flat tire 20 years ago, if I had, oh my God, imagine like had another flat tire the next month, oh, I probably would have felt more comfortable doing it myself because it still was a recent memory, a recent experience. So that's like the most basic way to understand that spaced repetition isn't just about English language learners, it's about all of us and our learning. And I'm sure you can all think of something in your own life. In fact, feel free to share in the chat. If there's something that you once knew, you once felt comfortable with or confident with, could be like a language you were practicing or a skill. Like I took calculus in high school, but I don't even know the first thing about calculus, right? Because I haven't used it since then. So it's completely gone. But if I wanted to continue on with the calculus, I would have needed that spaced repetition. I would have needed to revisit it. So feel free to share in the chat if you can think of your own personal example of something that you once knew, you once felt confident with, and now it's like completely gone from your skill set or from your memory. Because I know we all have those things. But when we think about our students, we don't want them to lose it. That's our job then, to figure out how can we be the facilitator to ensure that they don't lose those things. And we've all crammed for a test, right? You cram for a test to pass it, and then you're like, phew, it's done, gone forever in some cases. so that's really the crux of spaced repetition. I'm going to go back to my presentation. You can feel free to keep sharing in the chat if you think of an example that you would like to share with us. Oh, someone wrote burning CDs. You used to know how to do that, right? We used to do that all the time. And now do we even have that technology available to do it? I don't even know. Oh, Olga, parallel parking. I know I do not feel well, first of all, parallel parking in Philly is really hard, period, right? And in New York City. So I do not feel confident doing it. I feel like every time I try, I'm going to definitely have a collision. But we had to do it to pass the driver's test, right? So at one point in time, we were like, I got this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to pass the test. Barbara, I spoke French 20 years ago as a Peace Corps volunteer, but now I would really have to think about how to say the basics. Yeah, you had that skill, but without using it, it dwindles away. And some of those computer, those apps, those language learning apps and other apps are really based on this whole concept of spaced repetition, like Duolingo and apps like that, where they will figure out what mistakes you're making, and then they will cycle back to those errors and give you more practice with those errors. But we're not apps. We're teachers. And so we know our students best. We're not basing our instruction just on what some app says. We know our students. And so we're able to tease out their areas of difficulty. But then due to now with the lens of spaced repetition, we need to be able to think about how to best support those learners. So we're going to go through some examples of how we can do that. So once again, here's just a review of what spaced repetition is: meaningful, multimodal exposures. I put that in there because it's not just saying the word. And I don't want anyone to think, oh, repetition, like I'll say it, you say it, done. No, that repetition is really meaningful exposures to the word, and multimodal, using it, writing it, hearing it, seeing a visual. The research shows in the beginning, those intervals should be close together, lots of that experience with that word or skill or concept, but then you space out those intervals. And research shows to not stress too much about the exact length of the intervals. It doesn't matter if, don't worry if it's like, oh, I'm waiting a day, or does it matter if I wait 2 days? The most important thing is that you come back to it and that you don't let it go in the beginning for weeks and weeks. So it could be like, it could be up to you, what you think works for your students. Should I wait a day before reviewing this? Should I wait a week before reviewing this? And then you can adjust accordingly. And there's that, just a screenshot of what you saw in the video there, that we want to, in the beginning, make those intervals short, but then remember to review whatever that material is and come back to it. Now, do you ever hear of the term mixed review? Math teachers are really good at that usually. They have those mixed review sheets where they have questions about previous units and they stick them in their mixed review so that students are like, oh yeah, I forgot about fractions because we did that 2 months ago, but now it's in their mixed review, so I'm coming back to it. But I will say, you have to make sure that students have some level of mastery, or then the mixed review won't help. So the other day I was tutoring one of my former students, actually, who's in eighth grade, and she unfortunately got suspended for a couple of days, and they needed a tutor. I said, okay, I'll do it. So I'm tutoring them, one of my former students, and she is like, Miss Baker, I have to do this math thing, and it was a mixed review. So I said, okay, Stephanie, here we go. So the first one was something about something with algebra, and she's like, oh, I don't know how to do that. So I'm like, okay, so we're reviewing. I'm showing her how to do it. She's like, I really don't know. I'm like, uh-oh, okay. So we spend a lot of time on that. We move on to the next thing. The next thing is about, let's say, making a graph. She's like, oh, I really don't know how to do this. Then the next thing she didn't know how to do. So that's an example of a mixed review is not going to help in that situation, because this student clearly didn't learn all of those concepts with enough confidence that a mixed review is going to help her. Instead, it just made her feel like, I know none of this. And so it didn't work. In that case, she did not have enough time to really hone in on those math skills before it moved on. And so a mixed review just felt really frustrating for her. So that's an important part of it, that we have to make sure that there is some level of confidence and mastery before starting those spaced intervals, or else students just feel overwhelmed. And feel free to share if you have any questions. You can, of course, share those in the chat. Okay, so moving on. And I included some pictures of my students because they are amazing and I wanted to include them. I told them they would be included in my presentation today. So, what are the benefits of spaced repetition? Well, number one is what we all want: superior long-term learning. We're not teaching to a test. We don't want students to cram and learn and then forget the next week. So we want long-term learning. We want that mastery. We want students to be able to not only learn new words and language skills, but be able to apply them. And also, we know that when students feel confident, they feel happy, they feel successful, and those are all positive things for every classroom. So let me tell you another little story. So Oscar was one of my students a couple years ago. This was during COVID. That's, you can see with the masks, that seems like a nightmare memory that we as teachers were all living through. But on the left, you see Oscar on one of his first days at school. And so Oscar felt overwhelmed by too much input. He was also experiencing a level of trauma, losing everything he was familiar with, as we know, his everything that he felt comfortable with in his home of Guatemala, and he's plopped into a school in New York. And it was a paper that his classroom teacher had passed out, and he ripped it up into a bunch of pieces. He was not happy. That's what a lot of our students feel like, right? Whether or not they show it like Oscar did, we know many of our newcomers feel very frustrated in the beginning. They don't feel safe. They don't feel supported. And we as English teachers do everything we can to make sure our students as quickly as possible, develop that level of safety and comfort and security. And spaced repetition can really, really help with this. So this is a few weeks later, there's Oscar again. And now with spaced repetition, with him really being immersed in and supported in the language that he's learning, the routines of the classroom, he transformed into who he really is: a happy learner, happy to be in school, feeling supported, feeling safe, and learning, and being in a place where he knows, okay, I know the routines, I know the language that I'm being exposed to, because my teachers are using spaced repetition to ensure that I have that routine and I feel I'm learning language and feel safe. So I just share this with Oscar, this example of Oscar, because we've all been there with our students. They may not be ripping up pages, but we know they feel completely frustrated and overwhelmed when they're first learning language. Okay, how do you determine what it is that you're going to use spaced repetition for? So I'm going to talk about vocabulary here, but just a reminder, spaced repetition does not have to target vocabulary words. It can target, like we said, a specific skill. For example, with my third grade students, oh my goodness, sometimes they forget to put periods at the end of their sentences. So that could be something that I say I want to use spaced repetition for. Reminders to use a period, talking about periods. When do we use a period? Looking at sentences that have periods. I could do it with that. But for the sake of this right now, I'm going to just talk about determining what vocabulary you may want to target. But remember, it can apply to anything. Even changing tires does not have to focus on vocabulary. So how do you consider, if you want to choose some words that you're going to use spaced repetition for? So you want to think, number one, about your students and what they need. Yes, of course, we want to think about curriculum, but we also need to think about the students in front of us. What vocabulary is very important for them? And it may be survival vocabulary. So, for example, when I showed you Oscar, a newcomer who was really struggling to just feel safe, that survival vocabulary for Oscar would have just been bathroom, nurse, words that he needed to just feel like, okay, I know how to ask for the bathroom. I know how to ask for lunch or food. I know how to ask for the nurse if I feel sick. So that's, the survival language that a newcomer may need. But you may be working with advanced level students, and those would be completely different vocabulary words. But you need to think about those individual learners, what they need to get to the next step. And also, you got to pare it down. A teacher asked me, she said that one of my students was failing the weekly vocabulary test. And I said, let me look at that. How many words are there? And she showed me a list of 20 rigorous vocabulary words. And I said, whoa. Well, if she's failing it, can we pare it down? Let's look at maybe 5 of those words and see how she does, really focusing on 5 at a time, so that the input was not overwhelming. And how do we choose those words? Well, we look at what's essential and enduring. Which words are really crucial for the class? What words are really crucial for meeting the objectives of the lesson? It sometimes cannot be every word. As much as we want our students to master the whole list or all the words, we know our learners, and we know at some time they're not going to be able to take everything in at once. So you may want to consider tying those keywords to a theme, or useful words that they're going to be using in whatever context you choose. But also, if you're teaching students who speak a home language that has cognates with English, you may want to consider those words, because that's like the low-hanging fruit, right? So if you're choosing cognates, it may be easier for students to learn those words with minimal spaced repetition. And we know that, if you're teaching Spanish learners, that about 40% of all English words have cognates. And like we said, any cross-curricular carryover. So if you're choosing like words like research, right? That may work in your teaching context, but research is a word that learners will use in different classroom contexts as well, especially depending on what field they're in, or if they're high school students, they probably hear that word in many classes all day long. I'm sure we're all familiar with tier 1, 2, tier 2, 3 vocabulary words, where tier 1 are those very basic words, social language words. And those words do need spaced repetition. But the benefit of those simpler basic words is that usually students have repetition of those words just through social language, but not all students, right? And especially if they're struggling, like the example with my student Miguel. Oh, I noticed a typo here with frequency. I apologize for that. Especially with my student Miguel, even though red is like, we think, oh, kids exposed to the word red a lot, with Miguel, he needed that spaced repetition in order to really feel confident with that word. Then you move on to tier 2, those academic words that probably our students are not hearing casually throughout their day. And so we need to be more systematic with ensuring that they have access to those words at spaced intervals. And finally, tier 3 words that are domain specific. So those could be science words or social studies words that they need support from us as English teachers, depending on whatever else they're studying throughout their day. And so you may be familiar with this website. If not, achievethecore.org is a website where if you want assistance, for example, if you have a passage of text, maybe some rigorous text that you're working with students on, you can put it into the website, achievethecore.org, and the website will pull out tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 vocabulary words. And you could use that as a suggestion for, oh yeah, we're about to read this text. These are some vocabulary words that my students may need some extra practice with. So take a moment and consider, you can even just jot it down on a scrap paper. Take a moment and think about what words, or if it's not words, what skills you want to test out some spaced repetition with. Maybe it's something that a specific student in your class is struggling with, or maybe it's something you're going to be doing with your whole class of students, but you think it's going to be challenging and you really want to ensure that they have that spaced repetition to really master it. So feel free to jot down those words for a moment, just on a scrap paper, or just keep it in your mind so that you can revisit that and think about how you will use spaced repetition to help your students with those words or concepts. Now, spaced repetition, even though it's very simple, does have some steps that we need to take in order to really go through the entire process. So number 1, you have to teach. That's what we do, right? We teach the new vocabulary, or if it's a skill or something else that you're working on, we have to teach it. And our students need explicit instruction, ideally that instruction is multimodal, uses visuals, uses video clips, uses audio clips, gives students time to use the word in talking to partners or speaking out loud to the class. Usually, when possible, we use home language to support the teaching. We use visuals and opportunities to use the vocabulary in context, not isolated vocabulary words. And I'll tell you right now, if we're doing isolated vocabulary words, that's going to require even more repetition with shorter intervals. Because, when we teach vocabulary out of context, we all know that's extremely difficult because our students aren't using it. So number one, the one we already know, teach it, right? We're doing that. We know to teach it. Here's an example. We recently had tadpoles and frogs in my classroom. So here with my elementary students, tier 1 words that I was using with the kids were frog, tadpole, swim, water. Very simple words that they picked up very easily. Because they were using it, they were talking to their friends, we had it labeled, we watched videos about frogs, we read books about frogs, and we had our own frogs. So the kids picked up those words very quickly with minimal spaced repetition required. But a tier 2 vocabulary word, and remember, this is for elementary, entering, emerging, and intermediate level L's, change, right? Change is a tier 2 word, but they're going to hear it in different academic concepts, but maybe not just through social language. So we really had to talk about change, how the frogs changes from a tadpole to a frog. And then we talked about change in different contexts, right? Change in our weather, change in our environment, changing our clothes, changing, all different things, animals changing from baby infants to adult animals. So we really talked about that word a lot. And finally, the tier 3 word that we really honed in on was life cycle, specifically the life cycle of the frog, but also other animals that have life cycles. That's how we broke it down. Okay, so like we said, that was the easy part. But now we need to, going along with that, provide opportunities. And here's sometimes is where we have so much on our plates as teachers, right? We're like, oh, I already got to get to this. I got to get to this. That sometimes we do not provide, right? We're all guilty of it, as many opportunities for students to engage in whatever it is we want them to learn as possible. And this is a critical part of spaced repetition. We need to ensure that we're not just saying it a couple times and maybe students write it in their notebook and then we move on. This is where if we don't provide immediate and frequent opportunities for students to engage with that vocabulary or that skill, we risk that they are not going to be able to really use it, to feel confident with it, and to take risks, right? Take risks meaning trying it out with a friend, writing it in a sentence that they're writing. And so we have to be creative and think about how to give our students enough opportunities. And this is not assessment, right? We don't immediately assess. Students need to actually be using the vocabulary of the word. So here, going back to the frog example on the left, just some writing. Students had to read the sentences, read them to themselves, read them to a partner, draw pictures that went along with each a word, a big frog, a little frog. Those are vocabulary words that my students already know. Happy frog, a sad frog. With the newcomers who are not reading yet, I read it to them. We explained it. We looked at pictures. We said it in Spanish. We said it in English. The kids made frog life cycles. So this is all where they're hearing, using, gaining familiarity with all of those words, the tier 1 words, the tier 2 words, and those tier 3, the tier 3 term of life cycle. And here's another, like a writing example where they had to write about the picture. I gave them a couple key words, and then I was, they were once again using those words, all different modalities, and gaining confidence that they had a lot of repetition with that word frog, the word tadpole. Okay, so now we move on to assessment. But like I said, this is sometimes we're so quick to assess that maybe the students have not really learned that key vocabulary or that key skill. And so if you assess and realize, ooh, I don't see the level of confidence and mastery I was hoping for, that's where it may be too soon to start adding space with those intervals. We may need to continue going backwards, more opportunities to use, hear, write, read about those key concepts or those keywords. So that assessment is like a critical point. And we all know this as educators, right? Do I need to teach more and give kids more opportunities or learners more opportunities to use that word or that skill, or are they ready to move on? So if they're ready to move on, they're showing you they know it. This is where the spaced repetition comes into play. We want to be very intentional in providing frequent, meaningful, multimodal opportunities for students to come back to those key words. And so, how can we do that? Because we get busy, right? So think of Miguel and that fire extinguisher. The reason I chose that fire extinguisher was very intentional. It's because I know we're going to pass it all day long. I didn't have to like find a red thing in my classroom or remember, I forgot to ask Miguel that word again. It was more for me right then for him that I knew we were going to pass it, and that would be my visual cue to work on that word with him. Routine class language can really help our students, but also ourselves. So the more we have routine times in our classroom dynamic or in our day to come back to these key terms, the better. And that can work in different ways in different classrooms. So you could just post it, right? Even after the unit is over, like we make anchor charts, but sometimes we take them down because we've moved on to something else. But consider maybe keeping up old anchor charts somewhere, because the students, it's a reminder for the students. Oh yeah, remember we did that unit on prepositions, and the poster still stays up. I can refer back to it. But it's also a reminder for us. So we're like, oh yeah, remember 2 months ago we did this unit. I still need to find ways to include those prepositions in what I'm doing now. So it's a visual reminder for us, in addition to our students, to review any target language or concepts. Say also including images, visual representations whenever possible. If we just have like words that we covered at one point on the posted somewhere, but without the visual, our students may see it, it may be there, but they may not remember what it was that we wanted, that it represented. Also, think about ways to embed vocabulary review with your students in whatever it is, like a warm up, a do now when they first come to class, or whether you do like a little meeting each day where you come together and just share or talk. Anytime you encounter your learners is an opportunity to have a little bit of that repetition of key concepts that you want to make sure they still have. And like I said, once again, the more you have a routine of that. So like every day, if you know when your students come in the classroom, you are going to review one key word, that becomes routine for you. And then it's also routine for your students. And also connecting new vocabulary with previously learned vocabulary is very helpful as well. So some examples of how we can do these in the classroom. I'm going to skip this and come back to it. Homework. You can consider, if you give homework to students, is there a review of a previous concept or vocabulary somewhere embedded in the homework? It could be a digital review with an app that you use with your students, or it could be something as simple as like flashcards, right? That you use or that your students use to keep reviewing previous skills or vocabulary. Vocabulary glossaries, obviously something that your students, if they make them either digitally or in a notebook, where they can review previously taught skills or concepts. So here is, in my elementary classroom, one way that I embed spiral review every day. For our beginning students or our kindergartners, I always have like what's for lunch today with and review it. So it's there aren't that many choices for lunch, right, in an elementary school. So we find a way every day, if we look at what's for lunch, it's an opportunity to quickly review a food word. And then I have the kids, do you like eggs? Do you not? I like eggs. I don't like eggs. So some oral language, a number of a day, a shape, a color, an animal of the day, and a feeling of the day. So every day, we're going to cycle through those cards one a day and give students an opportunity instead of just saying fish, right? I would say, oh, what's this? It's an opportunity for a student to say it, name it, right? But then, oh, where does a fish live? Now another student, oh, fish lives in water. So it's an opportunity to review a vocabulary word and then go a little deeper and then let students use it in a sentence, describe it, talk about it. Whereas fish obviously is not going to always be something that connects with what we're doing that day. But this is a very quick way of reviewing very basic tier 1 vocabulary. And you could also have a word of the day kind of system with maybe more tier 2 or tier 3 words. But the trick is, don't add too many words. Think about that. If you have 50 key words and you're only reviewing 1 or 2 a day, because we don't want to overload our students, it's going to take a long time to get back to, let's say, word 1 in that deck of cards. So we want to make sure that we really are pulling out the keywords, because if you have 50 cards, it's going to take 50 days to get back to that first word. And that's too long an interval. They probably have forgotten that word by then. Here's one of my students showing us what she knows with that repetition. Another, key verbs can also be something with newcomers, that you have a deck of cards and you're really reviewing with spaced interval strategies. But once again, this can be used for any level student.
Excuse the interruption.
Sorry, we have announcements at our science fair. Okay, so take a moment right now and consider whatever you wrote down on that scrap paper. Think about what you wrote down on that scrap paper previously of something you want to ensure that that your students know, and think about how you could add opportunities for spaced repetition in your classroom or teaching context to review whatever it is you selected. Is it as something as simple as like some flashcards? Is it something where you would want to do like a spiral review in their homework? Is it something where you would want to just have words from the past units posted in the classroom and keep them there for longer so that you review them? Think about how this may work in your teaching context. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to review. These are those five key steps to successful use of spaced repetition. Figure out which vocabulary is the most important for your students. And remember, it doesn't have to be vocabulary if you are teaching something else, because this can work in learning in any context. Teach it. Remember to provide explicit instruction. 3, provide many opportunities for meaningful engagement with whatever new skill, concept, or vocabulary it is. 4, assess whether or not students have learned it. And then that's when that spaced repetition is happening. Make sure you are embedding strategic opportunities to review those key terms, that key vocabulary, with longer and longer spaced intervals to ensure that students retain whatever it is they have learned. And so there's just a few more pictures of some of my learners who wanted to be included in this presentation. Happy learners, because they feel safe and supported in learning whatever it is we're learning that day with things like spaced repetition in the classroom. And so I will have time for questions or comments, but here is my contact information. And feel free to reach out at any time. I've got my Facebook. I just started a brand new Instagram, ESL Excellence. I have my LinkedIn page, Facebook, any way you would like to connect with me. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if anyone has any questions or comments. And, and like I said in the beginning, it's spaced repetition. As we're listening to this, it sounds so academic, but it's such an easy concept, right? It's something we all know our learners need. And yet sometimes we have to really think about whether or not we're giving learners that opportunity to review things that we've already covered with the frequency that they need to really keep it, so that they don't end up like us, not knowing how to change a tire, or forgetting all their French, or not feeling comfortable parallel parking. Helen put in the chat, could be spelling rules, parts of speech. Exactly. It could literally apply to any field, any concept, because it's really just it's really related to a learning strategy that applies across any field. So it really is universal, and something that, you, and with older students, if you teach high school or university students, you can explain spaced repetition to them, so it can be like a meta experience where they're saying, oh yeah, I need that spaced repetition. They can take, they can kind of feel empowered to ensure that they are reviewing those things from the past, so that they understand the science behind it and how they have to review, or that curve is going to get lower and lower as their learning diminishes and they forget what it is they learned. Does anyone have any questions or questions or comments on the this concept of spaced repetition, or does anyone want to share what you are going to try, how you are going to try to use this in your own teaching context with your students?